The sky above southern Europe was supposed to be safe. It was November 7, 1944, and the war, though still raging, had already begun to tilt in favor of the Allies. Nazi Germany was retreating on multiple fronts. The Soviet Red Army was pushing west. American forces were striking from the air. They were on the same side. But on this day, something went terribly wrong. Something that would turn allies into enemies, if only for a few terrifying moments. And it all began with a simple mistake.
High above the rugged terrain near the city of Niš in Yugoslavia, a formation of American aircraft cut through the cold morning Airpoint 12P-38 Lightning fighters, fast, powerful, deadly. Leading them was Colonel Clarence "Curly" Edwinson, an experienced pilot who had flown numerous missions over enemy territory. For him, this was just another routine operation, or so it seemed. Below them, a convoy moved slowly along a narrow road. From the air, it looked exactly like what they had been trained to hunt, a retreating German column. Vehicles lined up, troops advancing, movement that suggested urgency, perhaps even desperation. Edwinson and his pilots. The conclusion was obvious. Enemy forces. Without hesitation, the order was given. Attack. The P-38s descended with terrifying speed. Engines roaring, guns armed. The aircraft opened fire on the convoy below. Machine guns tore through vehicles. Rockets slammed into the road. Explosions echoed across the valley. What followed was chaos. Men scrambled for cover. Trucks burst into flames. Soldiers fell under the relentless assault from above. But something was wrong, very wrong, because the men on the ground weren't German. They were Soviet and Yugoslav troops. Allies died on the ground. Confusion turned into horror. There had been no warning, no indication of danger from above. These soldiers believed they were safe from Allied air attacks, and yet the sky itself had betrayed them. Reports began to reach a nearby Soviet airfield. Unidentified aircraft were attacking friendly forces. First, disbelief, then urgency. Because if these weren't German planes, then who were they? At the airfield, Soviet pilots rushed to their aircraft. Yak-9 fighters, agile, fast, and built for combat. Within minutes, engines roared to life. Orders were clear: intercept the attackers, defend the convoy. The pilots took off, climbing rapidly into the sky, scanning the horizon for the enemy. And then they saw them. Twin-boomed fighters, sleek, unfamiliar, but in the chaos of war, there was no time for careful identification. The Soviet pilots. These aircraft didn't look like their own. They didn't look like anything friendly. Only one conclusion made sense: German. What happened next had never happened before. American and Soviet forces engaged in direct combat. The Yak-9s closed in quickly. The American pilots, still focused on their ground attack, suddenly found themselves under fire. Tracer rounds streaked through the air point. One of the P-38s banked sharply to avoid incoming fire. Another pilot shouted over the radio, confusion in his voice. "Who the hell is shooting at us?" There was no clear answer, only chaos. Within moments, the sky above Niš turned into a battlefield. American P-38s maneuvered aggressively, trying to identify their attackers while defending themselves. Soviet Yak-9s pressed the attack, believing they were engaging enemy aircraft threatening their troops. Dogfights erupted, tight turns, sudden dives, bursts of gunfire lighting up the sky. Pilots on both sides were skilled, experienced, and now locked in combat against allies they didn't even realize they were fighting. One Soviet pilot, Krivonigic, pushed his aircraft into a sharp climb, attempting to gain an advantage. But a burst of fire struck his plane. Smoke poured from the engine. Within seconds, his aircraft spiraled downward, disappearing into the landscape below. Another pilot, Shapulia, attempted to engage a P-38 from behind, but the American aircraft was faster, more heavily armed. The tables turned quickly. Moments later, his aircraft too was hit. Two pilots lost, not to the enemy they had trained to fight, but to their own allies. The Americans were just as confused. These weren't German planes. Their shape, their movement, something didn't match. But in the heat of combat, hesitation could mean death. So they fought, because survival demanded it. Back on the ground, Soviet commanders tried desperately to make sense of the situation. Reports were coming in rapidly. Friendly units under attack. Aircraft engaged in combat overhead. Losses mounting. And still, no clear explanation. Was this a mistake? Or something far more dangerous? In the air, the battle continued. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like an eternity. Pilots dodged, fired, climbed, and dove in a deadly dance of confusion and fear. And then, reinforcements arrived. A new group of Soviet fighters entered the sky. Yak-3s. Faster, more advanced. Leading them was Captain Alexander Koldenov, a skilled and disciplined pilot. But unlike the others, Koldenov didn't rush blindly into the fight. That he observed carefully. And what he saw changed everything. The aircraft they were fighting, they weren't German. The markings, the shape, the behavior, these were American planes, allies. Koldenov acted immediately. He maneuvered his aircraft into a position where he could signal the American pilots. Wings rocking, movements designed to communicate, not attack. It was a desperate attempt to stop the chaos before it got worse. For a moment, nothing changed. The battle continued. Shots fired. Maneuvers executed. And then, one of the American pilots noticed the signals, the hesitation. Something was different. Slowly, cautiously, the realization began to spread. These weren't German fighters. They were Soviet. Allies. One by one, the firing stopped. Engines still roared. Aircraft still circled. But the shooting ended. Silence returned to the sky over Niš. A silence filled with shock, confusion, and the heavy weight of what had just happened. On the ground, the damage was clear. Destroyed vehicles, burning wreckage, fallen soldiers, all victims of a tragic mistake. In the air, both sides began to withdraw. No victory, no celebration. Only unanswered questions. How could this happen? How could two allied forces turn on each other? The answer, as it turned out, was painfully simple. Navigation errors, miscommunication, and the fog of war. The American pilots had been operating with incorrect information. Their maps and intelligence led them to believe that German forces were retreating through the area. The convoy below matched that expectation. And in war, hesitation can be deadly. So they acted. The Soviet forces, caught completely off guard, had no way of knowing who was attacking them. The aircraft didn't look familiar. The attack was sudden and devastating. So they responded the only way they could be by fighting back. After the incident, communication between the two sides intensified. Reports were exchanged, details analyzed, and eventually, the truth became clear. The United States formally apologized. They explained the errors that led to the attack, acknowledged the losses, and expressed regret for what had happened. But for the Soviet high command, the situation was more complicated. First, there was suspicion. Was this truly an accident, or something more deliberate? A test, perhaps? A message? In the end, the explanation was accepted, but the incident left a mark. The Niš Incident became one of the rare moments in history where American and Soviet forces, allies in one of the largest wars ever fought, engaged in direct combat against each other, not out of hatred, not out of strategy, but out of confusion. And perhaps that is what makes this story so haunting, because it reminds us that even in a war defined by clear enemies and allies, the line between them can disappear in an instant. Today, the Niš Incident remains a relatively unknown chapter of World War II, overshadowed by larger battles, bigger victories, more decisive moments. But for those who were there, for the Pilots who fought in the sky, for the soldiers who were attacked on the ground. It was a moment they would never forget. A moment when the war turned inward. And in the chaos of that November morning, allies became enemies, if only for a few tragic minutes. And sometimes, that's all it takes.